Hello, my name is Justin DeClue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we have a very special episode because we are talking about David Cronenberg again, but we're doing it with the person that wrote the book on David Cronenberg, Violet Lucca.
Hi, guys.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us, Violet. And David Cronenberg, a topic I didn't think I would revisit because it's something that is covered so often that I even feel, Will, when we did our episode, we were like, this is the contractually mandated David Cronenberg episode that people keep asking us about.
I'm actually very happy to be revisiting Cronenberg because I feel that on the previous time we did him, I was maybe a little, I haven't listened to that episode or anything, but I remember being just a little bit too much under the sway of Robin Wood at the time. Robin Wood being, probably the great Canadian left-wing critic who is probably like the greatest dissenting voice towards Cronenberg. Obviously, I love Cronenberg. Who doesn't? But I feel like I have sometimes allowed his take on Cronenberg to occupy a disproportionate share of my brain. So I'd like to rectify that a little bit today with Violet.
Well, I feel like these are uniquely Canadian problems because Cronenberg is such an icon of... Well, I mean, he's like the most exportable, most successful Canadian director. So to be like, oh, God, again with this guy, I understand. But don't let any of the people in your audience think there's not anything new to say about David Cronenberg. Or just remember the nice things.
That leads me to the first question I want to ask. Very simple, straight ahead. Why write a book about David Cronenberg?
Well, somebody asked me to. I'd sort of been... Ever since I left Film Comment, I had sort of been kicking around the idea of starting a podcast about Cronenberg with Adam Naiman, friend of the show. There were multiple times where we thought it was right about to happen, and then it did not happen. And then fall of 2022, I got David Jenkins of Little White Lies, he's the editor of Little White Lies, reached out to me and was like, hey, would you like to write a book about David Cronenberg? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, I would say, if I was not me, I would not. I would be like, who wants to see Cronenberg again? I'll just rewatch the movies. But that's a bad attitude. That's a poor attitude. I won't take it.
Well, you announce in the opening pages of the book that taking on this book coincided with an interest in Jungian philosophy. Was that the significant spark in sort of finding a new angle of approach?
Yeah, I think so, because I sort of talked about this in intro a little bit. Just thinking about creativity itself and the act of being creative and how we do kind of, where do you go when you write? That sort of eternal question. So I wanted to sort of open things up and not talk about body horror because I think it's stupid. I actually saw a YouTuber talking about Tarantino's body horror. It was just like this. It's a meaning like of course this would happen. This is a meaningless term. This is not like the YouTuber's fault. It's just a crappy term that really doesn't mean anything. So I was like, well, what if we're thinking about what is so disturbing about these images, what in us, in our collective unconscious, in it throughout different cultures, throughout his work, because he's working with very universal themes. Through the specific, he finds the universal, right?
Your approach to the work of David Cronenberg, we mentioned Jungian philosophy. That's the structuring backbone of your entire book. So even if you don't know the terms or the way that he would approach this kind of stuff, it's a book about David Cronenberg and about Jungian philosophy at the same time, as well as your personal journey through both of these things. Because when you hear that, you're like, oh boy, that sounds like a textbook. And this is anything but, because you are inserting your own kind of opinions, your history throughout the book in a very personal way. And so I'm curious to know that this kind of structuring principle, did it come early on when you were given the task of writing or accepted the task of writing a book on David Cronenberg?
When you're writing a book, you have to come up with a book proposal. They're not just going to be like, oh yeah, here, take several $1,000s and do whatever. So you write up a proposal, and I got a piece of very good advice, which is that, the publisher will accept pretty much anything. But it's better, when you write a book proposal, it's sort of like, yeah, I'm going to do this and this and that and this and that.
They're like, did you write a proposal? Yeah, I'm not going to read it. All right, yeah, go ahead, go do it.
But you know what I mean? You can kind of say whatever you want at that time and then do something completely different in the writing. But it's better to just figure it out early. You have to figure out at some point, do it before you start. And so that's what I did. And I was thinking, actually, a really great book, Nightmare Alley, is structured, is all about psychoanalysis, and of course the carnival, and it's each chapter has a different tarot card, and there's interesting things going on there. So I was like, well, why don't I just steal what Grisham did and kind of do something similar, but not involve just terrible alcoholism destroying a man. So
yeah. You didn't have that issue too much when you were writing your book.
No.
In that opening chapter, you talk about some of your own personal experiences with your mother in her last couple of years, and you link that in relation to some of what the Cronenberg films have to say about the body, sickness, how we deal with sickness in society. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about, how you came to love Cronenberg, and then maybe how your relationship with his films has evolved or changed on a personal level that led to this book?
All right, I'm just going to sit back and let the rest of the episode play out, because that was a nice general, all-consuming question.
I'm a professional. I went to journalism school.
Yeah, that's damn right. That's a journalism-ass school question. I actually have a hard, because other people have asked me this, but I have a hard time, or variations on this. I've had to think about where did it begin? It started when I was at the University of Iowa, and I was taking a course on horror cinema with Linda Mockdad. She's a great professor, and she showed The Fly. And it was really interesting to take that course and sort of like thinking about horror as this, there were lots of different ways we were shown how you could think about horror. And the screening of The Fly was like, obviously it was in my mind. It was something like, oh, I've heard of this movie before. But when I saw it, it just upset me so profoundly. Like I was just like crying, and I was calling my roommate, being like, Brandon, help, all this, it was this huge thing after that experience, and just sort of being kind of blown away by this movie that's that was just out in theaters. It was just showing everywhere. Everyone got to see. Yeah,
The Fly is something that I feel people are like, I get it. I know what it is. You can be moved by it, but you usually have a general idea based on just, cultural osmosis of what the product and the experience will be.
Right. And then to actually experience it, it's totally different.
I saw The Fly in high school, as you do, and of course I liked it, because how can you not?
I mean, we all picked up the 2-disc DVD that was put out, right?
Right.
Where it's you get The Fly, you get The Fly 2, I got the whole package.
Two equally strong works of art. I probably didn't watch it again for 15 years, and then I saw it again just a couple weeks ago. And the process of after you've seen it, after you've actually seen people grow old and die, after you've seen your own body change over the years, there came a time when my metabolism stopped working the way that it used to, and now I count calories. And that's the kind of experience I see reflected in The Fly.
So I guess the next steps in my Cronenberg adventure was seeing Videodrome and just being blown away by it, and then having my aforementioned roommate at the time be like, I think this movie's just weird to be weird. And I was like, fuck you, Brandon, you're wrong. You don't get it. And then watching Crash with my friend Carrie, and then her turning to me at the end and being like, Violet, I think we just watched a porno. And just sort of going deeper and deeper into these, all these great films, and find it very rare for a filmmaker to actually make stuff that's provocative and upsetting and sort of visceral. And I know a lot of people say, oh, I think his movies are really stiff and emotionless. I find them profoundly sad and very moving. And I think that is sort of my goal with this, is just to show people how they can be those things, despite the fact that everybody may seem extremely calm to slightly zanned out.
Well, The Fly is an interesting film in Cronenberg's we're talking with an author here, so I need to use the big words. In that, it's one of those films that he's always brushing up against, is this the movie that's going to take him to the next level and become a kind of mainstream guy? And you're also, for this podcast, I watched The Fly and A History of Violence, two movies that were kind of almost is there a next stepping stone to a more kind of mainstream Cronenberg? And rewatching The Fly again, especially in contrast to History of Violence, that that kind of like coldness or unemotionalness that a lot of people, give to Cronenberg, I associate more with a kind of not plasticity, but a kind of like meatiness that's difficult to explain, but I associate with Paul Verhoeven in that like there's metaphors, there's readings into his films, but it's also all out there. And I think The Fly is so emotional because that balance is so kind of perfectly intertwined with the story he's trying to say, mostly grounded in the storytelling methods he's using and the performances of Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum in that, like, they're giving very real performances in ways where, A History of Violence, his other kind of like mainstream film, they're much more mannered and kind of like in your face, which is weird to say that like, oh yeah, the Jeff Goldblum performance is not mannered, but it's like, it's different.
I know, right? He wasn't always Jeff Goldblum TM, right? Because that's what makes the film so effective, is that it is this absolutely cute, like funny movie, and then things just completely fall apart. And that's exactly what happens when somebody you love gets sick, or you yourself start to change, and not in a way that it's like sold to you in this fun way, like adolescence. Oh, it's just, not that being an adolescent is always great, but that it's like this marker that you're progressing, that you're moving toward adulthood, you're moving toward this freedom, you're moving towards this autonomy. And although it might be rough, there's going to be something at the end of it. And then as you get older, there are bodily changes where it's like, oh man, there's no coming back from this. There's no coming back from this. And you are alone in it. Obviously, like the existentialist thing where it's like, we all die alone. And it's like, well, we're all sick alone too. We all are aging in our own way. And like, you can kind of talk to somebody about it, but it's not the same as being in your own body. And yeah, that's not, I don't know, why would you ever call that body horror? That's stupid.
I think it's like a more of a surface level thing of like, this is what I'm responding to viscerally. And I mean, your book that like we die alone, we get sick alone, it's also kind of a journey through these films to reach a point of understanding of like, how can you analyze these things? And as just the person reading it, maybe come to a better understanding through these films of the things that we're all going to have to suffer through.
Something that doesn't really get mentioned very often is that so there was, Cronenberg had done these two kind of arty films in the late 60s, and he went to Cannes and he was sort of like disgusted by it, and then he was like, oh, this is so commercial, disgusting, and then he left, and then he was like, well, if I want to do this as a career, and I do want to do this as a career, I have to try and like learn from this in some way. So he goes back and he sort of starts to see how he can take the things that he's doing and, the original Crimes of the Future or Stereo and kind of transpose them. And around this time, his father is getting sick and has this really horrifying death because of some calcium malabsorption thing going on in his body. And it's like, somebody turning over in bed and their ribs break. And it's just like the most basic human movements are not available to you. And you never think that will be you. Because you don't think that would be someone you love. That's somebody else. That it happens, and you're somebody else to somebody else, right? And just like him saying, Cronenberg notoriously like non-theistic, does not believe in God, doesn't even want to like make movies about ghosts because it implies that there is an afterlife.
I don't make movies with demons because I don't believe in demons, so it would be a bit of a contradiction for me to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And, seeing his father go through the series, like there was nothing like redeeming about this. Like this person is just slipping away. And I mean, that's exactly what happens in The Fly, and the very sort of like the operatic nature of it, but also the fact that, even though it's this fantastic narrative, it's something that we all have to deal with.
Obviously, I've been thinking a lot the last week about the other David Lynch. Both he and Cronenberg are obsessed in their own ways with the idea of the self. What is the self? To what extent is the self artificially constructed? In The Shrouds, Cronenberg's most recent movie, which unfortunately is still not released, it sort of flirts with the idea that the self is the body itself, like it is, and many of his films do. The Vincent Cassel character in that is resentful towards this doctor who treated his wife and who previously had an affair with his wife. He's resentful to this doctor because like he has took pieces of her body to experiment on later, as like organ donations. It's like he owns part of that body that he considers rightfully his. But then, so 2 nights ago, I watched A History of Violence, which I wouldn't say it's contradictory, but it comes at it from a different angle, where it's like, that movie raises the question of, whether Tom or Joey is the actual Viggo Mortensen. And at the end of the day, all he really has is that body that unites them, I don't know. I thinking about it in relation to David Lynch, like, do you think there's an overlap in how they see the construction of the self, or are you more struck by their differences?
Lynch was a big believer in the unified field, right? And that there is this profound connection between all of us. And I think actually I might have approached Cronenberg with that mindset. I always think of this great anecdote where Lynch was, working on Twin Peaks, and he talks about putting his hands on the top of a warm car. He closes his eyes and he sees the red room. Like he gets the idea for the red room. And there's just something about that moment where it like comes to you. And also Lynch being a relentless, positive person, even though he would get very cranky on us.
Wait, Cronenberg was not a relentless, positive person? That's what I know him, old smiley Cronenberg.
This is very nice. He's like a super nice guy, but I think, he's working. I mean, they're both working something out, right, in their films. And there certainly are overlaps, but I can't answer this question very well. Now I feel like a dumbass. Really hard question to ask, because I would love, because what I would love to do is to watch something like Lost Highway and then watch Spider and be like, well, how are these talking to each other? Because those are the two films, like, perhaps the unified field is speaking to me now. Those are the two films that are on my mind when you raise that question.
Well, I mean, when I think of both those filmmakers, like, I associate, like, as a snap judgment that David Lynch is a more instinctual filmmaker, while Cronenberg is an analytical filmmaker. And I think what your book gets into is that may be true, but what these films are also tapping into is that kind of like collective unconsciousness of these are all this is why they're so visceral, is that if it may be in an analytical way, a cold way, as some people perceive it, it's also in a way that's going to hit everybody, because it's something that films don't really tackle in a way, even through like a horror lens, that like you feel deeply, that you're like, oh no, this is reflecting me, not in just a thrilling way, but in a way that like, oh, it just gets me. And that's why I think Cronenberg has lasted as long as he did, even though, like you said, when he came back from Cannes the first time, he's like, all right, I just need to be commercial. I need to be able to tell the stories that I'm doing in these experimental feature films, but get it towards an audience. It's funny, in the first part of your book, I love how your book is structured too, which is like, all right, you guys want a quick history with all the trivia? Here it is. I'm just going to race through it.
Very well written, to be clear, and very interesting.
And it's as if you were standing there and talking to me about it. I'm like, yeah, more, filled with stuff that I was like, wait, David Cronenberg almost wrote a draft of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for Ivan Reitman? That's bananas. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
You're kind of like laying the groundwork in your book, though, to then tackle all of these themes in more kind of siloed ways through the Jungian, I want to say Jungian every time because I can't pronounce things, kind of philosophical method.
In the popular imagination, there's sometimes a distinction between the early low-budget horror films and the later dramas with bigger budgets and bigger stars. And, John Waters is somebody who also has a bifurcated career that is talked about in the same way. And I think these distinctions are sometimes ideological. There's a sense that a very careerist sense that like you elevate to a certain level and then you put away childish things.
No more exploding heads, as Violet says in the book.
Yeah.
You basically reject the idea that there are strictly two phases of the career.
Or like the whole like late Cronenberg thing. That's dumb. Like he started shooting on digital. Like, is that what makes you want to be like, oh, this is late Cronenberg? Because I'll tell you, because I will say quickly, The Shrouds reminds me of the original Crimes of the Future. Like, I feel like, and very much like that Burroughs influenced, and also, Nabokov influenced kind of stuff of that era of somebody going into this weird world and then kind of never finding their way out.
You're mentioning kind of like digital filmmaking, but that is a return to the kind of coldness that he had in Crimes of the Future.
Exactly.
Where like his early films were structured as like fake kind of Canadian educational documentaries. And by going to a digital realm, what you're doing is that you're creating a kind of layer of artificiality, but that's where Cronenberg loves to play.
Yes, exactly.
And so like he's getting closer to the themes that he was tackling in a pure way early on in his career.
Do you see a line between like Shivers and The Brood and then A Dangerous Method on the other end? Because I bring those up as, you know, stylistic extremes.
So obviously there are some, you know, nobody wants to talk about Fast Company.
I want to talk about Fast Company. There's oils on boobs. People love it.
Ridiculous. But that's where he met so many of the collaborators that he continued to work with throughout his career up until today. Like Carol Spears.
Mark Irwin's like, please give me a call, David. I would like to be working up till today.
Well, also, Ronald Sanders. I think, you know, the difference between how The Fly looks versus how A History of Violence looks, there is a sense of difference, you know. Also, I think in terms of the methods that he used, he just sort of refined and refined and refined. And then he got to a point where, you know, he found a way to communicate with actors where it's just like they really had to do it once or twice, as opposed to something like, you know, The Brood or Scanners, where it's just constantly trying to figure out what the fuck am I doing, and like really, like shooting all this extra stuff and driving the special effects people crazy. He just becomes more himself.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book that the actors say that, like, oh yeah, in the later films he doesn't give much direction unless it's like very specific or they ask. And that may sound like, oh, he's an old filmmaker. It's like John Huston, like looking at the racetrack forums being like, hey, yeah, whatever you want to do, Annie and your friends, doesn't matter. But it's more like he has it locked in. He knows what he wants to do from like a pre-production phase. And that like, if you're getting on a David Cronenberg project, I think a lot of people also have a general idea of the kind of vibe that he wants to do. I will say History of Violence was an interesting path because you have a History of Violence, you have Eastern Promises, and then there was that like $100 million film he was going to make that was going to star Denzel Washington or Tom Cruise.
Both of them. Well, imagine how insane that would be.
And it fell apart because the film production company fell apart in 2010. But like that would have been an interesting path for him to go down, even though that like looking at his filmography, I don't think that's something he can sustain. Like as much as there is that instinct of like, oh, I'll be a commercial big budget filmmaker, he always takes turns of like, even after History of Violence, oh, I'm going to make a Dangerous Method now after Eastern Promises. And it's like, oh yeah, people are like, we don't want that. Like, give us the other stuff.
I would say that the thing that's also stayed the same is that, he talked about, working on those early films like Shivers, made in Montreal, famously, because that's where the Canadian film scene was happening. There's a lot about Canada in this.
I greatly appreciated that. And I'd like to raise that shortly. Yeah.
Him actually being on a commercial set instead of just like some weird art house thing where he's doing every job and the actors being like, well, I was going to do it this way, and just working with blocking the actors, and that he would, he's gotten to a point where he will change the set to accommodate how actors want to play the scene. Like he's more less than, giving them direction. He is responding to the way in which their idea of what this is. And, I think having that, like if you've ever been on a film set, the idea that you kind of like allow the actors that latitude is pretty radical, because it's like you take if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not working with good people, it might completely screw everything up, right? But if you do know what you're doing and you have people there to support you and to be like, Maria Bello wants to get mad and throw up in the toilet after Viggo Mortensen admits that he is Joey, there's Carol Spear to be like, okay, yeah, we'll knock down this wall, we'll make a bathroom for her to do that. Like that's a unique thing.
Watching A History of Violence again this week, I was struck by, on the surface, much more than The Fly, it looks superficially at first glance like a normal movie, quote unquote. Like The Fly has all the signifiers of a Cronenberg movie, but somehow by fluke it became a popular success. History of Violence is 90 minutes long, and it's this kind of relentless forward motion entertainment machine. And once it was done, I realized how troubling all of its implications are and how irresolvable all of its implications are. What it's saying about the construction of the self and what it's saying about, one leaves it completely unsure who this protagonist is. And one thinks everybody in the film is unsure about who he is. And then you think, well, who is any of us?
I mean, something watching History of Violence this time, which I didn't clock previously, which was how artificial it all felt. Now, that may be from a distance. It's like visual signifiers. Like the lighting is very kind of like in your face, long shadows, almost like porno shadows at times, which are bringing the people forward. And even the way that like the scenes early on of home life are constructed, it's very like, oh yeah, that's how it would be. My little girl had a nightmare. This person comes in, and then this person comes in being like, what's going on? This person comes in. Everything is constructed almost so perfectly that it feels wrong, and that the break of Viggo Mortensen, like being who he is, feels like, oh, this feels right. This thing coming out in all of this. I mean, also, this is the most Canadian-ass America's Small Town ever. Every actor that shows up, it's like, you could not get a more Canadian actor to play these roles.
Oh, you'll love these shoes, Mrs. Stahl. You know, like that woman just drove me nuts. I can't really do a Canadian accent.
But you could read it as metatextual kind of like, yeah, this is wrong, the way that it's all kind of built up.
It's true. Every Ontario town looks exactly like that. Every Ontario town has that street. So I did stay through the credits to see what town it was exactly. It is Kincaid. In the book, you mentioned that the title, A History of Violence, is very evocative, and it could mean, it calls to mind everything from the indigenous genocide to Henry Kissinger to the ongoing bloodshed in the Middle East. A lot of the book takes place against the backdrop of the Canadian film industry, but in A History of Violence is this case where it's like he's sort of straddling the border. He has this somewhat, and Justin, you mentioned what a Canadian looking and feeling movie it is. He has this sort of outsider's perspective on America. But then also when he shoots in Canada, it has this sort of cold, unreal quality of like he rarely calls attention to the fact that it's Canada, so it looks like a sort of American every city.
I do know people who think that Crash was filmed in LA, and it's like nobody, eh? Because I mean that's the thing, like because so much of Canada has been used to sub for New York, LA, Chicago, Nowheresville, America. Like it is sort of this prop, and he has a unique way of, as someone who's lived there his entire life, he has this unique way of sort of making the familiar strange. And of course, there's some variety of stuff I could go into. I'm not going to do it.
Canada's the shadow self of America.
Yeah.
yeah, no, exactly. And it's like the same, struggles that some of his characters have with their own identity and the self can be applied to his depiction of Canada, which is everywhere and nowhere.
Absolutely.
I was kind of struck this time watching A History of Violence and just thinking of like, why this film? Like, why was this one that like everyone was talking about? It was a huge hit. I mean, in any other context, it would be like, yeah, this is pretty good. Like, but it just struck that nerve, especially at that time, to get that kind of like popular reaction to it. And I mean, you just have to look at the date. It's like, oh yeah, we're past 9/11. And this is almost a power fantasy for people watching it of like, oh yeah, this guy is bad, but he's in control, even though he's struggling with this. And this is what I want to see, which is not the way Cronenberg is interpreting it, but that's him kind of like cluing into that collective unconsciousness at that moment.
So, it is great to go back and watch Carolyn Cronenberg's little featurette about the making of that, because they do a mock election, and clearly someone just is trolling, and they're like, one vote for Bush. And then everyone, and Carrie gets all the other votes. Like, it's very funny. And then everyone's just like, yeah, I'm Canadian, it's illegal for me to do this, blah blah blah. It's like very cute. It's like, and I think if you want to get a sense of how he works, I think that's a great document. And also just like, what a cool guy Viggo Mortensen is. Like, it's just like, damn.
As to why that movie worked so well and struck such a chord, on the one level, it works exactly the way a movie like that is supposed to work. It has no fat. It's unpredictable. It's genuinely unpredictable.
There's cool fights. And then you see the aftermath of those fights, which then takes it into horror.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Cronenberg stylistic touch, isn't it? Seeing Stephen McHattie's mangled face on the ground.
But I would say, I know the emotional reaction that he's going for, but those after effects, and I was thinking of this because I remember you writing about it, where they were almost goofy in the prostheticness of like the guy getting his like nose punched in until it's all kind of like, it almost gets to a level of splat stick. And that's kind of like the thing Cronenberg's been playing with his entire career, because like early on in his career, he was as you mentioned in the book, like he was creating this personality. I'm the provocationist, and I have a t-shirt that says more blood, and you can see that, as well as like, this is very serious. These are the consequences of the violence that are being inflicted upon these characters. But also, look at this blood that's shooting out of this guy.
He talked about watching like these direct-to-DVD like self-defense videos, which is basically just showing you how to kill somebody. It's like, this should not be. There's a classic American thing where it's like, things should not be legal. But it's just, if someone comes up to you, this is the move you do to like smash their nose in, like use the palm of your hand, like, you know what, it's just like that sort of visceral violence and how quickly it happens.
Yeah, there's no showiness in any of the action scenes. I'm putting in air quotes in here.
No, and it makes it real, but it also makes it thrilling. And then there's that come down where it's like, you see how, you know, you have the artificiality of like how much damage Joey can unleash on somebody, but also like, this is horrible, and like that his son somehow also has inherited this ability, and then it leads you to wonder, it's like, well, has he been, the way Tom Stahl presents himself is extremely corny, and that's part of what people are responding to, but also like the corniness is an overcompensation of sorts, and it leads you to wonder, it's like, well, have there been other times where he hasn't been so good at hiding the fact he was a murderer?
In your writing, that like when the son gets slapped is like, has this happened before? The film never says that it hasn't. Like, you don't know if this darkness has bubbled up before, and this is just like underlining to his family members that like, oh yeah, it's always been there. This has not just been like here or there or breaks. I like how you said that it's almost like genetically transferred over to the son, and David Cronenberg looking over at his own son being like, oh no.
Oh no. I liked Possessor. I thought it was cool that they had a guy who looked like Rob Ford get killed in like the first like 5 minutes of the movie.
I'm a big fan of Possessor, to be honest. So.
It's great.
I haven't seen it. I saw Antiviral, and I remember that when I saw Antiviral at TIFF, the programmer said that it was one of the best debut features they'd ever seen, and I thought, oh wow. And then I started doing an inventory in my head of like, so wait, it's as good as The 400 Blows, it's as good as Citizen Kane, it's as good as there are a lot of good debut features.
You always get yourself in trouble when you start thinking too much about these things. Just let the heaping praise that the programmer who's just like there to meet celebrities has said, just let it sit. Let it just soak over you and enjoy the show.
If you don't mind if I bring up Robin Wood just one more time.
No, please do. Yeah.
You know, to him, movies like Shivers and Rabid were very much about this sense of social decay brought about by the sexual revolution. They were metaphors for this. I don't know if he ever wrote about Crash, but I could see him having a similar sort of moralistic reading about like, oh, once you go too far down the path of having sex that isn't missionary position with your spouse, it's an
heterosexual.
Yeah, heterosexual. It just goes down a dark spiral. I'm curious to what extent you think that reading of his work is that sense of Cronenberg as a moralist is valid.
I mean, watching something like Shivers or Rabid, I get quite the opposite impression. I get the feeling that something like Shivers is absolutely making fun of these people in this ridiculous building. This, to drop another name that is meaningful to Cronenberg. J.G. Bellardian, this Bellardian high rise that is literally on an island, that is self-sustained, that has its own hospital and doctor and grocery store and all of this stuff that these people never have to leave. And so to see that, and then to like, I understand that, like, if if I was watching it at that time, and like, the sort of thing when things are really getting out of hand, there's kind of like this giant orgy and like you could, that is a feeling I might have gotten at the time, but I'm watching it now, right? And so I just see the way in which society has come to mirror that. Like, I live a couple of blocks away from a condo that is owned, waterfront condos that are owned by Jared Kushner, and they have a lot of those amenities, and that those people in there are definitely, they're just as sealed off as the residents of the Starliner, and they're just as, interested in only pursuing their own life, and the idea of coming together. It's contagion. It's nothing to do with sex. It's just contagion and just this desire to be alone in your space and be perfectly sealed and perfectly happy and 72 degrees at all times. Like this feeling of luxury and specialness, that acknowledge that the disgusting nature of the city isn't going to get you. And then in the end, of course, what's happened in the luxury condo comes to the city, comes to infect the cities. I understand where he's coming from, but I feel like with all of that, like, is very forward in my mind. And again, that's just how reality is played out.
Just thinking out loud, do you see a similar class dimension to something like Crash, where like the characters in that movie are, true bourgeois, and they're looking out their like condo windows at this like glass and steel skyline, and they're in the midst of this luxury and comfort, they're looking for something. They're looking to feel anything.
Let's be honest. Crash is the Fight Club for the art house crowd. That's what it's always been and what it always will be.
Wait, say more about that. This is intriguing.
No, I see what you mean. I get it.
Like, we're supposed to be happy. We have everything. What are the ways to go beyond that and find some kind of feeling?
Right. Except for it doesn't blame women.
No, that's true. 100%.
It's not just like, you're a fucking soy boy and that's why you're miserable. Like, that's...
Well, I think we can all agree that American Beauty is the movie that came up with the correct answer, which is drop out of society,
have sex with a teenager.
Yeah, exactly.
The sexist moniker is something that Cronenberg has struggled with his entire career, that people are constantly throwing it at him. And as Will said, that kind of like moral, is he morally panicking with these things? And you mentioned that you see it more as kind of a class distinction. But then, like, when Naked Lunch came out, people were like, oh, but it's about, I'm gay? Oh, no!
So what's interesting about Naked Lunch is that it's an unadaptable novel, right? It's these series of routines. I actually have a copy of it on the back of my toilet because it feels like the most appropriate place for it to have it. Because you can just sort of flip open to any page and just see, like, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of funny. That's beautiful. That's poetic. It's whatever. Sort of these little ephemeral things that are connected in these different characters that come and go. Okay, to sort of step back, we're thinking about how queer people were represented in media in 1993 versus now. And there was very much this dearth of positive images, right? And the most positive image was perhaps Tom Hanks is an AIDS patient in Philadelphia, and that's pretty poor. That's not great. So to have a film that is showing someone, as Burroughs did, it's interesting. Burroughs isn't really thought of as a queer author, but he absolutely was. And
I think a new streaming film called Queer makes that clear.
Yes, I was about to mention that. But that Queer is one of the books that Cronenberg drew from. And sort of that self-loathing. And that's really what's missing from Luca Guadagnino's Queer, is that self-loathing and sort of the nastiness of affection, because Burroughs had a very conflicted relationship to connecting with other people. Like, it wasn't anything to do with being gay, but the horror he felt of, not just sort of being outside of society because he had murdered his wife in the stupidest way imaginable. He had this completely unacceptable thing that was unacceptable even in like beatnik circles. So what does he do? He goes to the one place that sort of like is marked okay to express those desires by undergide, which is Tangier, right? And so these things that I understand why people would be mad about that and be like, oh, well, it's really sexy when he's having, when he's cuddling up with the woman and then the sex blob comes in and then it's gross because it's a butt. And it's like, no, this is like what he was working through. Like, is Allen Ginsberg's boyfriend, and he wrote Allen Ginsberg a letter after finishing Naked Lunch being like, yeah, I think writing this book actually...
Yeah, Burroughs was like, I think I can be cured of this gayness.
That was part of the messy history of queerness in the 20th century. Like, it's just, I mean, it's the same problem where if you have, like a difficult woman in history, right? It's sort of frowned upon to sort of be like, yeah, she actually, or to show her sort of conforming to societal ideals. And it's like, you can't be rebelling all the time, like you have to live your life. And even if it is depraved life of a junkie.
I mean, these are all complicated themes, but I just want to take a photo beside the big smoking guy at the Tiff Lightbox and share it on social media.
Yeah, for those who don't know, about 10 years ago, there was a David Cronenberg exhibit at the Lightbox here in Toronto, and for the next 5 years, basically everybody's Facebook profile picture was them posing with the guy from Naked Lunch.
Yeah, the film about the guy struggling with his own sexuality after committing murder. But here's me doing a peace sign with that guy.
The Mugwump is modeled after Burroughs, right? Where it's got like this hunch and it's smoking, and it's like it's this grotesque. That's how he saw himself. Like that's what that's the thing that is hard to. I've seen so many people be like, oh yeah, Cronenberg thinks it's so funny that he killed his wife that he puts it in the movie twice, and it's like, you've never had a pattern of self-destructive behavior, have you? You don't know what that's like. That's your hot take, or again, and it's like something for everybody. It usually is something for nobody.
Did you find writing this book that you discovered stuff either personally or just textually about David Cronenberg that you weren't aware of before?
I mean, absolutely. I think thinking about the end of History of Violence and how closely that mirrors the end of Scanners. It's literally the same sort of confrontation, this epic confrontation. But also, I just think it was really nice to spend time with the work and sort of, again, like I really, I have some master's degree in like Jungian psychology, Jungian philosophy.
I mean, you admit right at the beginning, you're like, I attended a class on Jungian philosophy in 2022.
And when I talked to a scholar who's really helpful writing this, but I feel like going through that process and sort of reorienting my worldview and reorienting the way that I look at films was really helpful for my writing. And then also just personally, just to be like, well, hey, maybe my dreams are important. Maybe these things that I sort of push away because they don't seem to be productive, they don't seem to be moving towards all of these things that I'm told are important and I kind of sort of don't agree with, but I ultimately go along with because, like Burroughs, I have to exist in society. Like, I found that was very helpful. And also just thinking about how do you make a story and how do you communicate these larger ideas? And yeah, like Will said, well, we're nobody, but maybe we're not. Maybe we're like these questions of identity that are really rich.
I also appreciated how you positioned your criticism in the book, or you framed the works as being, open-ended and living texts, and it didn't necessarily frame your judgments as definitive, but rather...
Oh man, I love some of that stuff where at one point you're like, I fucking disagree with this when you're talking about a Jungian principle.
Yeah, because he was writing like 100 years ago. Of course, like if you're agreeing with something somebody wrote 100 years ago, think about it again.
I love that there's an encouragement that the book is essentially interactive. The reader is invited to sort of go on the journey and come on and off whenever he or she or they chooses.
Yeah, you guys are doing a better job of talking about the book than I ever could, because I wrote it and then it's just like, it just went out of my brain.
That's what happens every week when we do a podcast. Sometimes Justin and I will look at Sometimes we'll look at the old episodes and say, oh my God, we did something on that person. Who knows what we said? One more thing I want to bring up is I love how the book does take place against the backdrop of the emerging Canadian film industry. This isn't a question exactly. I just love that the Canadian film industry comes across as this thing that...
Losers.
Well, yeah.
We're all losers.
It has been in a perpetual state of identity crisis since its very inception. And the fact that Cronenberg has become, maybe the most recognizable name associated with it is no thanks to the professional stewards of the Canadian film industry. It's like there's that great bit of information where one of his early films, Stereo or Crimes of the Future, is playing, it's not playing at one of the establishment film festivals where Peter Watkins and Delmar Daves have been brought in as judges. And Watkins is complaining in the newspaper, why aren't there any movies?
There was literally no feature films to be judged, and they're on the jury panel for Canadian, I think it was a precursor to the Canadian Screen Awards that they were judging at the time.
The wannabe Canadian Oscars, because they were trying to get this thing started.
They're still trying to get it started.
And meanwhile, down the street, Cronenberg is playing his movie. A young man named David Cronenberg is playing his movie at the slam dance, basically, of this festival.
I mean, it wasn't even that. There wasn't even like a festival going. He was like, this is a grudge screening. This is absolutely me exercising my grudge because these people don't like, this was rejected on the grounds that it is an experimental film and not a feature film. And I find that absurd. So I'm going to do this the same night. That was something you could do and it would mean something, right? Like because the other thing is, like, as sad as the Canadian film industry may or may not be, no judgment.
We know what it is.
You can say it. Toronto itself was a very rich, like, there are tons of screenings going on. Like, there's this kind of annoying hagiography of the 60s that goes on that I am sick to death of hearing about. But it was, in fact, a very, like, rich and cosmopolitan city. And there was a lot of different, filmmakers moving through and literature that wasn't available elsewhere. And just, it was happening.
There's a great documentary, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called Toronto Jazz by Don Owen, who made Nobody Waved Goodbye. Worth seeking out. And Nobody Waved Goodbye, you mentioned that in the book, was, I think, our first, like, international breakout success, maybe, and also flopped in Canada before it got, until it was accepted at the New York Film Festival, at which point it suddenly became a classic Canadian film.
Well, like the story of all Canadian film and the famous ones were all done without letting the funding bodies know. Oh yeah, we're making a documentary. No, we're not. Shh, we're doing something completely different. This brings to mind, though, is David Cronenberg the most famous Canadian director?
I mean,
like, the most well-known.
Sean Levy.
You don't know Sean Levy's Canadian. You don't associate him as a Canadian director. When people think of David Cronenberg, they think of him as distinctly Canadian.
A year or two ago, the Globe and Mail did a survey. I think it was the Globe and Mail. No, it was TIFF. It was TIFF did a survey of, like, best films by a Canadian director. Do you remember this, Justin? It occupied... No. Okay, why would you? You could vote for any movie made by a Canadian director. And so, of course, Terminator 2 was on the list.
Oh, my God.
I can't remember what won. I think maybe The Fast Runner won. But high up were some James Cameron movies.
See, I didn't even know he was Canadian.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing I'm saying, though, that, like, Cronenberg is so distinctly tied with, like, he's that weird Canadian guy, that he's almost the most famous Canadian director by that link. Like, it's like saying, the most famous Canadian actor, Jim Carrey. And it's like, yeah, he is Canadian. But I think that's mostly more of an anecdote as opposed to a kind of, people see it as a defining trait of them as a person.
Absolutely. And I think, and that's what, throughout, and I think I note this in the book, there are many times throughout his career where it's like, is this going to be when Cronenberg goes to Hollywood? And it keeps being threatened, and he never does.
Has he talked about why he never did?
There was this great article, I think it was 79. It was sometime in 79, where he was just sort of like, the houses in LA don't look like real houses to me.
That's what
and it's just like, not for me. It's just like not my thing. And I think, the fact that he wouldn't have as much control, and it was very much the same story, as, like, when I first accepted this book, I didn't realize, he may not have made that many films as compared to, like, I don't know, Woody Allen.
Name that gets mentioned was David Cronenberg all the time.
I don't know who that is.
All the time.
Mort Rifkin's favorite filmmaker.
what does he think about?
David Cronenberg?
No, what does Mort Rifkin?
Oh, Mort Rifkin.
What does Mort Rifkin think of David Cronenberg? Well, I think he liked The Dangerous Method very much.
I thought like Woody Allen's on the Zoom right now. Here he is.
Didn't Alec Baldwin do that? Where he just was like, oh, he was having some live stream and then like Woody Allen came on. And I don't.
Yeah. Oh, did he ever? Yes.
I think that's the one where Alec was like, "Shut up!" I mean, he does that on every episode, but he famously did that.
That was the Wi-Fi was. People don't remember this. This was in like 2 or 3 years ago at the height of COVID, and Woody Allen had an autobiography come out. Like Alec Baldwin had a Zoom live stream where he had him on as a guest, but the Wi-Fi kept failing at Woody's place, and so it was just over and over again him cutting out and Alec Baldwin going, "We've lost Woody," and him yelling at his wife about it.
We lost Woody a long time ago.
Yeah, buddy, I got bad news.
Anyway, I didn't bring him up.
No, I know you showed such restraint, but what I was going to say is that Cronenberg's career, he hasn't made that many movies relative to other sort of name brand auteurs but his career spans such a huge amount of time, and there are so many changes, and there are so many same but different impediments to him making the films that he wanted to make on his terms, like the whole thing where he was going to make a sequel to Verhoeven movie. The one with the ice pick.
Basic Instinct.
He was offered Basic Instinct 2. He thought, okay, maybe this is my big shot to time to make it big. And fundamentally, it just did not work out. Like, it just blew out. When he made Spider, sorry to keep going on about Spider, great film, he basically didn't make any money for 2 or 3 years, which is insane to somebody kind of like put them that much of themselves into a project like that. Obviously this is before crowdfunding,
And now it's Netflix and Amazon Prime who are turning him down.
Did that happen? I didn't read about that.
Yeah, he was supposed to develop something for Netflix, and then because that's what The Shrouds was. It was supposed to be. It was like a pilot. First hour was like a pilot for the series that he was going to do, and then Netflix was like,
"Can you make The Shrouds more Game of Thrones like?" No.
Yeah, could you can we have some dragons in here?
Didn't it drive you insane when Ted Sarandos, the head of Netflix, had that statement the other day of like, we were just making something with David Cronenberg. We were going to greenlight it any minute. Sorry, David Lynch, he said.
Yeah, we're going to greenlight it any minute. No, you turned down the project he offered you.
If you were serious about this, you would have done it already.
I mean, there's certain filmmakers like Cronenberg, Lynch, they should get automatic passes. That these big streaming giants that money means nothing to them are like, yeah, just do whatever you want. It'll give us a cachet that we can put your stuff up there.
They act like that is the case. And it is absolutely not the case. Then, it's like they want the name. They think they want the name. And then it's like, oh, wait, you want to do that?
Well, that's like when FX was like, what the hell is this? When they were given Twin Peaks: The Return.
Or Showtime, rather.
Showtime, yeah, sorry, not
and
FX.
He wanted to shoot on 35, and they were like, no. And then Lynch is like, I'm not going to do it. And then everyone is like, you motherfuckers know what he says. And then they're like, okay, fine. And thank God they did, because that is so good. I don't know. It's just like hard. Can I be super frank right now? Everyone's like, oh, is it so cool that you wrote a book? It's so exciting. And I'm just like, there is so much stuff going on that makes me that makes me so sad. And it is really like with Lynch, it's this end of an era, and also like a beginning of a new era where it's just like more of the people that just completely help to define your idea of what film is, what film can be, are just going to keep dying. And I hate that. That's very sad. I will say, having seen The Shrouds twice, you very much get the sense that Cronenberg is prepared to have that be his last film. And it's very much like, this is it. And this is me. And it's really his first personal film since Brood. And I also think that is what, there are many things about that film that make it unique, but that just like how much of himself that he's showing.
The fact that the thing that kind of defined his more of his kind of haunting of the body decaying, his dad's calcium, is literally visualized in the film, like that specific disease in a way that he's never touched upon before, is like, that feels kind of like a full circle kind of thing that like I'm coming back to tackle, and then also intertwining it with the passing of his wife as well, and putting them both together, it feels like that final statement, like you said.
As far as I can tell, I think his wife actually suffered some of like the same, like falling down, breaking a hip, like these horrible things that, again, if we're lucky, if we get to live long enough, we get to experience these things. Like cancer is a very brutal disease. And to see somebody you love go through that and to be like, there's nothing I can do. Just as, again, to circle it back to the fly. Again, I mean, these things are all very much connected, but I feel like part, after The Brood, certainly is a turning point in how he was received and some stylistic things. But also I think the reaction to like how upset he was at his ex-wife freaked him out. Like the pushback from that, I think freaked him out, and he sort of stepped back and was like, okay, this is not going to be as directly autobiographical. It will be personal. And I obviously, like, there's sort of like the famous quote where he's like, when, the character in The Brood strangles his ex-wife, like, that was satisfying to me on some level. And every feminist quite rightly stopped me and was like, excuse me, could you say that again? What the fuck do you mean by that? Like, like and especially what spousal abuse was like that. Like, there are lots, again, so much of the outrage. I don't know. I've never been divorced, but I have known people who've been divorced who are like, yeah, I kind of want to strangle them, male and female. It's just part of the game, baby.
I completely understand and empathize with that feeling, because who else could inspire such extreme emotions as the person you love the most?
Isn't that a cheerful note to end on? The person you love most might be the person you fantasize about strangling.
And now that I'm on record as saying that, bookmark that, everyone.
Yeah, we'll be playing it at your trial.
Yeah. All the signs were hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. No, it's funny. It's funny, and it's very true. Again, like I said, if I had not written this book, I mean, that was actually part of a fear of one of many fears I had about writing this book, is that people would see it and be like, Cronenberg. But it is absolutely, like, as nice as it is to maybe sort of like watch something comforting and to sort of like veg out, and like, that's good. Those are good things to do. There are pleasures to be had and things to be felt even in these really kind of really bracing films.
Please, yeah, that's how we end
it. Go out and buy it.
It's a coffee table book, which, as I've said before, I think I've said no one has ever read a coffee table book in the history of mankind.
I know, that's the other thing.
Except for this one. It's very easy to read. I think that's the thing, is like a coffee table book where you're like, oh, is it dry and kind of like just the facts? There's lots of pretty photos. It's beautifully designed. And as you say in the intro, I said this having written a book too. Well, you can jump to the film you want to read about, but it's really meant to be read from the beginning to the end.
It's also not too heavy. I just want to say that too. Like, you can have it on your lap. You can carry it with you. It's not. It's a coffee table book, but not to the point where it's annoying.
I was having to cook food after putting a child down, and I wanted to finish the book. And I was reading it in the kitchen while water was boiling, the way it was meant to be read. The people's David Cronenberg.
And you were reading the part about The Brood, and you were thinking, I feel this so strongly right now.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Violet. So I was going to say, you have anything to plug? The book. Yeah, go buy the book. Available where all good books are sold.
Oh, and I'll say, I will probably start tooting around on YouTube, doing YouTube-y things. And maybe a podcast.
Oh, on Cronenberg?
But it will take a form that you would
Is it going to be structured using the Jungian philosophy?
It will have a unique structure, but it has nothing to do with Swiss psychologist Carl
Well,
Jung.
I've long said that the medium of podcasting is better when Violet Lucca is in it. So we look forward to that.
Yeah, I miss film comment podcasts that you edited so much.
Yeah, that was fun.
Well, thank you very much for joining us again, Violet. No letters this week. We've gone long. This is an all Violet, all David episode. I was Justin DeClue.
I was Will Sloan.
And I was and continue to be Violet Lucca, question mark?
I forget what I say now that there's three people.
That's all, folks. Wait.
Buy my book. Buy my book. Oh, man. People, They've got a fever out there.
Oh, what fever could that be?
Oscar fever. Have you made that tweet yet, Will?
No.
There's a symptom with there's little gold men. You see little gold men everywhere you look.
Wait, I'm seeing here Peter Howell just wrote an article in the Toronto Star. This means nothing to Violet, but to me and Will. Oscars 2025. Where's the love for Canada? Well, you got to make the films, guys.
In fairness, he may be. I'm sure he's referring to the fact that Matthew Rankin's Universal Language did not get a nomination in the Best Foreign Film category.
He does mention it.
Aside from that, I'm not sure what the Canadian nominees would be.
But, how do you guys feel? Were your predictions correct about what would be nominated? Looking at those nominations, all I got to say, rough year for movies, eh? Not much came out.
Violet, did you win your Oscar pool?
I'm really not somebody who enjoys the Oscars, even on an ironic level. I don't go to some party and I'm like, oh, you made a funny drink. That's a pun name.
But just imagine you're still editing Film Comment. You absolutely would do an episode on this, wouldn't you?
No, we talked about doing an episode that was like Oscar pro and con, where it would be like me and then like
who would be pro Oscars?
Well, I think Mark Harris probably would be pro Oscars, and there are some other people like Farron Smith Neme. She's made the argument that like the Oscars do matter in terms of like film preservation and what films remain accessible for programmers in a repertory capacity. Like I feel like there are probably many, but I'm like, Hollywood was just trying to cover its ass because like Fatty Arbuckle killed some lady. That's been bullshit ever since.
Anti-union. That's why they did the Oscars, because they wanted them competing against each other.
And anti-union, yeah.
Well, you mentioned Mark Harris, and I actually heard him once make the most convincing argument I've ever heard for the Oscars, which is that he said that the Oscars are a snapshot of how the industry wants itself to be seen at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's worth thinking about basically only in those terms. As to the argument that like, look, the Academy does all sorts of great work. They do preservation work. They have archives that they have to maintain. What about all these, international films that can vie for the best international film Oscar? What about these careers that actors have, et cetera, et cetera? So that I would say we need to work to create a better film environment so that this stuff can happen without the Oscars.
I mean, I just wanted to talk about all my favorites: A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Emilia Perez.
Man, A Complete Unknown getting my only take about the Oscars: A Complete Unknown getting a Best Director nomination for James Mangold is wild to me, because I guess the old people must have just loved that movie. And obviously James Mangold, I mean, what do you say about him? He puts the camera in the right place and he keeps it moving. But
well, I mean, it's what's impressive to me is that he did that amazing Johnny Cash movie, and then Johnny Cash is in this movie and he sucks. Like, he got the worst Johnny Cash imaginable to play Johnny Cash. I was just like...
Wait, Joaquin Phoenix doesn't come back as, like, a kind of interconnected universe?
It should have. He should have. The Mangold expanded cinematic universe. But no, he doesn't. It's just some guy.
I was watching that movie thinking, wait, Johnny Cash was at the Newport Folk Festival? Why was he there? He's not a folk singer. And then, I learned, of course, he was not. He was there as a dramatic device.
Listen, Ed Wood never met Orson Welles at that diner.
That is at least effective, because you're like, okay, clearly this didn't happen. But then it's like, this is just confusing.
All right, so I know you guys aren't invested, but I'm going to say all my picks of who I think is going to win. Honora, Best Picture, Best Actor, Adrian Brody, sure. That would rule if Adrian Brody won Best Actor.
No, I think he probably will, honestly. He probably will.
I actually think Timmy can get it, because he's hosting...
You think Timothy can get it?
Yeah, he's hosting SNL in a week or two, and he's both the host and the musical guest.
Is he doing a Bob Dylan impersonation?
He's doing Bob Dylan as the musical guest.
How does it feel?
This, to me, is the action of someone with the killer instinct. This is somebody who wants that prize and is going to earn it. So I'm putting my money on Timmy, and for Best Picture, I put my money on Emilia Perez, because It feels like I haven't seen it. I am unlikely to see it. It just, I don't know. The old war wound is telling me, the winds are in the air, and they're telling me that that's what's going to win.
Isn't the way the Oscar structured though is that like the voting for whoever wins has not happened yet, right? So like there's going to snap back from Emilia Perez getting this many nominations, and people will be like, oh, okay, maybe not. I'll go to the next thing. Nora is very critically lauded. Like people like that. Yeah, I'll vote for that. So like Best Actress, Mickey Madison, sure. Best Supporting Actor. I have not seen any of these movies. Guy Pearce. That would be funny. It's Yura Borisov in Anora. Great. Love him in that. Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain. Edward Norton in A Complete Unknown.
He's doing like a Death to Smoochie voice.
Playing the same character, basically.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
That feels right. I can't verify that, but that feels, well, I could if I cared, but that feels like the sort of nomination that would happen because the movie itself got 500 nominations.
Didn't he get nominated for Birdman in like a supporting role where he was also that like intense guy? Isn't it wild that William Hurt was nominated for A History of Violence for Best Supporting Actor?
Well, yeah, that just goes to show you how different the category has become, because before, supporting actor was like a small, juicy, meaty role for a character actor. And now it's like co-lead. It's very bizarre, and I don't care for it. Because obviously, like when, I vote as part of the New York Film Critics Circle, this always comes up and it's just like, it feels wrong.
I agree. The fact that Brad Pitt won a couple of years ago for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he's
like the star of the movie.
He probably has as much screen time as DiCaprio does.
And obviously we don't want to be like, oh, you have to be on the screen for X amount of minutes and you have to do these narrative tasks and blah, blah, blah. But it's just like, it just feels like you're elevating stars instead of someone who is a character actor who's more committed to craft.
We want people to watch.
I know, they're so pathetic. They're just like, please put it down the TikTok.
Best directing. Does, I can't say his name, Brady Corbett take it for The Brutalist?
Brady Corbett.
Because it's the most directing in the movie?
I agree with that. I think he's going to win.
Best adapted screenplay. I hope it's A Complete Unknown. That would be so funny.
I would laugh if I hope September 5th wins whatever category it's up for in screenplay. That would make me laugh. By the way, how did September 5th not get a Best Picture nomination? I mean, Jesus. Like, it feels like it was born to get a nomination.
I've never even heard of this movie. That shows I'm going in the correct circles.
Ding, ding.
Best international feature. I'm Still Here, The Girl with the Needle, Emilia Perez, The Seed of Sacred of a Sacred Fig.
Two of these are up for Best Picture. So I think this category is the biggest joke of them all. The fact that every country gets to nominate one movie, and it's the most corrupt process. A bunch of idiots and bureaucrats decide what it is. So, the big controversy this year is that India didn't choose All We Imagine Is Light, is that what it's called, as their nominee. They chose some other movie, even though these corrupt local boards make their decisions. But the fact that every country only gets one nomination is wild. Like, imagine if, I don't know, The Bicycle Thief and 8.5 came out in the same year, Well, neither of them would be nominated. It'd be some piece of shit that, that the local board figured out. So I don't know. Just the category itself, the idea of like, well, we have a category for, of course, most good movies are American, right? But luckily we have a category to acknowledge all the other movies in the world.
Well, I'm all about the New York Critics Circle. Those are the awards that really matter, right, Violet?
No.
What? We were on the board. I'm throwing it to you.
Can you give us some gossip on the record? What's Peter Travers like?
I've never seen Mr. Travers there. I've never seen Mr. Travers.
You've never seen Travers. Okay. Wow.
And you know what? I do not think it is. I think it is against the bylaws to talk about it. So I'm not going to say anything other than that. We get snacks.
So there's like tons of dirt you just can't share publicly of like fist fights breaking out.
It's one of those things that people have these fantasies about, and then it's the experience is not maybe lives up to those fantasies. So keep your fantasies pure. That's what I'll tell you. Just keep dreaming. Just keep dreaming about the amazing arguments that are being had